All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad you're here. Before we get started, we want to note just a few housekeeping points. To avoid background noise, all participants will be muted for the duration of the webinar. We will be addressing questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions as the webinar continues, please enter them into the questions box, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen if viewing from a computer, or at the bottom of your screen if viewing from a phone. If you have any comments or concerns during the webinar, please also enter these into the questions box. We will review and address any immediate needs as they occur. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to each registrant tomorrow. The recording will also be available on our website at www.namimd.org for any individuals that were unable to register. After the webinar today, you will be asked to complete a short survey on the aspects of this webinar that you felt were helpful, could be improved, and what you would like to see in future webinars. We plan to continue hosting educational webinars, and we ask that you please fill out this survey to let us know how NAMI Maryland can best support you during this time. NAMI is excited to partner with BetterHelp to support our local healthcare workers by providing access to a free month of therapy. BetterHelp is convenient, private, online therapy where you can talk to a licensed professional therapist at any time. If you are a healthcare worker, including mental health and/or substance use provider, be sure to fill out the post-webinar feedback form to receive instructions and your discount code. I'll now hand it over to our moderator, Sharice.
Thank you, Marquise. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Sharice Strong, a board member with NAMI Maryland, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. We are pleased you've joined us today for this very important topic. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken its toll on many of us who have lost friends, family members, and co-workers. Many of us are grieving the loss of normalcy and familiarity. You're here today to learn about ways to move through grief and cope with the loss brought on by the ongoing pandemic. NAMI Maryland supports you in the hard work you do, and we want you to benefit from your time here with us this afternoon. Today, we are hosting Tony Barker. In addition to specific techniques, he will address the why question, making the case for restorative efforts to be prioritized even in the busiest of schedules and weighty responsibilities to others. We will introduce neurology-based strategies for getting the most out of the time spent on the vital skill set. This includes significant enhancements to efforts you may be already making. CEUs are not provided for today's webinar. However, a certificate of attendance will be sent to each registered participant tomorrow afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Tony Barker is a professional TEDx speaker specializing in conflict to wellness. He is an award-winning singer, songwriter, and producer. Mr. Barker consults on the development of training materials for Resolution Solutions. Since 2016, he has been the primary presenter for Resolution Solutions trainings, focusing on the neurology of trauma and how it affects victims and first responders and self-care practices. Thank you for joining us today, Tony.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be invited back to this group of people that are making such a difference in the bigger group of people. We appreciate it a whole lot. I included the opening slide that you use. We have one that we use when we're talking to law enforcement and first responders. So the neurology of trauma, as Sharice mentioned, and we talk about the mechanism of what happens when we are dealing with trauma. And a simple definition of trauma, so that we're all on the same page, is that when the system, our human system, us, is completely overwhelmed by events. This is different from stress. Stress is a choice of alternatives to how you can impact the next, coming time period, whatever that is. And trauma is when you just can't see your way towards wellness. You can't see better from here. And one thing about trauma is that it's not something you can build up a resistance or a tolerance to. It's not like working out where you add more weight and you get better at it. It's more like erosion. And the other sneaky aspect of it is secondary trauma. When you're exposed to the trauma of others on a repeated basis, law enforcement, medical personnel, EMTs, even clergy, a lot of people that are the first outcry of somebody that's struggling with something that are overwhelmed by. If that happens on a regular basis, it just doesn't happen for free. It comes at a cost. And a lot of it is knowing that what the trauma mechanism is. There's hormones and chemicals that are released that are designed to help us get through a physical emergency, but it comes at the cost of the working of our rational thinking part of the brain. So I'll introduce our team. Marla Polk is one of the founding members. She's a conflict resolution specialist, period, full stop. That's what she does. Patty Winich Schlager is an attorney that's now, was an attorney, now an associate judge on a family court. Kathy Giebler is our family therapist that helps with a group that we run here in Texas on Thursday afternoon. And it's not working backwards. It's for women that have been victims of violent crimes, but it's not a therapy or a counseling session. It is communication so that these ladies can work their way forward in communication with bosses and family members and community members and coworkers and folks that they have to relearn how to, or get more tools basically as far as how to move forward specifically. She also is the author, Marla Polk is also the author of a book called Grief Survivor. It's sometimes irreverently funny, but it's on the journey of, we have that slide, you can just show you the picture of the book. It's on the journey of her loss, catastrophic loss of her husband after, her first year after that loss. And there's a link there if you like to do that. It's a free download from Kindle. It's a good read, takes about an afternoon, and it's more fun than you might think, but it's really, really impactful. A lot of people have been positively impacted by that. So we talk about the why question. There's an old quote that says the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I've always thought that was a little silly because the journey begins with the decision to make the journey. And that's an important point of demarcation, because if you just go somewhere, you're going to end up where you are. And a lot of what we do in terms of the neurology of trying to bring people back to wellness is using the brain, not to just go along with what it does, but to actually integrate the brain's own healing functionality into going where you want it to go. You can do some things that can mitigate secondary trauma and rumination, the conversations that you have when you really need to be sleeping, and about how you wish things would have gone better, or you wish you would have had more information earlier, or re-scripting conversations, or just reliving them through. And there's ways that you can, obviously you can, if you can, bring that back intentionally, go to a place of gratitude or specific tools and techniques that we'll talk about here in just a second. But the real big question is doing it. A lot of people that we talk to are in either the business of helping others, or they're in a caregiver situation where they're caring for aging parents or a special needs child, or someone that needs a lot of your energy. And a lot of times what can happen is you get in the habit, or by temperament, you might be a person that gives, a giving, love-based person with a servant's heart, and there are a bunch of wonderful attributes to those. But one of the things to watch out for is an overstepping of boundaries, and that is one big question. We've had some questions already early in the set. How do you do this and how do you do that? And some of those are communication issues with the boss, and you bring to the boss, how do we integrate this into work? And the answer is it's in their best interest. So if you can demonstrate that, my dad said, never bring your boss a problem unless you also bring one or two solutions from which they can choose between. So the problem is, I need a break. The solution is possibly taking a break. Whatever those physical functionalities of that solution becomes, the idea of your boss to say, look, I need to do this so that we can get more done, so that I can get more done during the day. And sometimes that might mean 10 minutes to step away and breathe and do something called tactical breathing. And we'll get to that in just a second. But one of the things that we've found is a good tool, this is research, Dr. Rebecca Campbell, and there's a multitude of functionalities in this. One of the tools that we use in our conversation is, in other words, I hope I've answered the why question. The why question is because it's important, and it's so important that it's worthy of adding to your priorities. A lot of the people that are erasing that boundary and giving so much of themselves that they don't have anything left over. They don't have any abundance left over for their family or for themselves. And a lot of these giving, supporting, helpful people do it because it feels selfish to spend some time on self-care. It feels like we're taking away from others when we put on to ourselves, but it's an investment, because if you are at your best, you are in an abundance of wellness that you can share. You can give more if your cup is not just constantly full from here. We've all been through this period, this pandemic. There's a war in Eastern Europe, and just the general nastiness of politics, and people are just, you're surrounded by people that are full up to here, and including ourselves, we're all full up to there. So and not everyone will intentionally choose to empty their cup, so that we have to. And so if you're full up to here with stress and busyness and things that are truly genuinely important, and they don't leave you time for your own wellness, it's time to take a breath and step back and use what I consider to be one of the most powerful words in the English language: no, I can't help you right now. And we use phrases like, I've got more on my plate right now that I can say grace over, or just practice those phrases, because they are a sign that you are deciding to place yourself a little bit higher on the priority list. You can't always put yourself first, but by being that giving, loving person, you need to share a little love with yourself. And the reason for doing that is for the benefit of others, so you don't have to feel bad about doing that. So that's basically the why question. So here's one of the how answers. We have, it's a goofy little kit. We give it to them in a little bag, and we give this to them. And imagine giving this sensory stimulation kit to law officers. I mean, it's tough to answer the why question a lot of times, but what these do is when you have those periods of rumination, or you have that overwhelm period building up, the idea behind this is to get your mental track into a different mode just temporarily. And we do this by stimulating the parts of the brain that aren't involved in the immediate problem, when and if you can. Obviously, if you're dealing with an emergency, deal with the emergency, but as soon as you can afterwards, engage any of the five senses, and preferably all of them simultaneously if you can. We're changing something about the way people see. We're changing the headphones are illustrating the listening to your favorite song. Taste is part peppermint and part chocolate, because in my opinion, chocolate solves all problems. But also the stimulate down here, you can see the feel stimulation of the Play-Doh, and I don't know if the heart-shaped stress ball is coming across very well, and the smell, to stimulate that smell senses. I have a bottle of lavender there, and the new car smell. And the idea behind that is to engage the parts of the brain and stimulate a part of the brain that's different from the pattern that we might find ourselves in, sometimes by habit, sometimes by circumstances. And it helps other people. You can, as let's say you're a care provider, and then you see somebody that's kind of getting wound up and they're stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, which is an indicator of these hormones and chemicals that we talked about when trauma kicks in. You can offer them something to grab. If you have a stress ball or a glass of water, then it forces the brain to process the coolness of the water, the taste of the water, the feeling that they're doing something that is positive for them, and it doesn't require conscious thought. The brain is processing these sensory stimulation pieces all by themselves. And it doesn't have to be this. I hope you make your own kit that's personalized to you. And the site doesn't have to be anything that you give someone. You could just change the circumstances of where they are. If you can walk outside, walk to a different room, what will happen is the sounds are different. They might have to process now the direction of wind or air conditioning coming from a new place. There will be different, the way your voice sounds in one room to another will stimulate that hearing response. And all of those need to take place. Taste and feel and smell. If you can give somebody something, you don't offer it to them necessarily, but maybe just give it to them. And if you have a diffuser or a candle or something, obviously you have to watch for allergies, make sure that nobody's allergic to any of those things, or they're diabetic. You have to use judgment. And another aspect of it is that if you're, this is a very specific case, if you're law enforcement and you're dealing with someone, or if you're the first on scene at somebody that has been assaulted or particularly sexually assaulted, their body is a crime scene. So you want to be careful about giving them anything. You can't give them a glass of water. You can't give them anything to taste, but you may be able to stimulate sound and hearing by going into a different direction. You want to be careful about touching them, obviously for their purposes, and also because you don't want your DNA into that crime scene interjected in there. But with those caveats, just use your experience and your knowledge of the circumstances in which you are, and the idea of changing that brain in those times. There's several other aspects to this sensory stimulation kit. If you can have one close to you and get in the habit of operating your brain and engaging the brain's own self-healing tendencies, then now you are building your trust in this tool, so that if, God forbid, there becomes a big event, now you have something that you can give that will give you a little bit of comfort, a little bit of way forward, a little bit of vision. This is something I've done before that helps. And you can build up trust in this by practice. So I would urge you to have a sensory stimulation kit of any kind. And it doesn't have to be anything. You just look around the room and your eyes will process the visual difference. If you're in your car, just count, just look at the other cars, just intentionally know that you're engaging your sight or hearing or any of the senses that you have. Another very big use for the sensory stimulation kit and the concept behind it, which is involving your brain, all these different aspects of the brain, is that when you are off, when you are not required to be your hard charging, go ahead, get the job done, accountable to everyone thing, if you can do this and sensory and stimulate your senses in an intentional way while you're off. For example, if it's time to take a bath, make sure you put something in there that smells good, or have a candle that smells good. Put your favorite song on. Make sure you have something, protein bar or cookie or anything along those lines that will stimulate all of the senses intentionally. Soak in those and contemplate and meditate on those as best you can, and focus on using the healing power of the brain. You can't always do that at work, but you can access these things very quickly in times of need at work. You don't have to make a big production out of doing it. Just access all of these senses while you're doing what you do. When you're off, engage them fully and 100% as best you can. And part of that goes back to this. We have something that we call the ABCs of wellness. And that's it's just this, as basic as it is: awareness, knowing that these things are coming, and knowing that there are things that you can do about it. Not just taking a knee and just letting every day just roll over and happen to you. Take a breath and determine if there are changes that can be made or that need to be made. Balance is part of that sensory stimulation kit, and it's partly just when you're off, be all the way off, be completely off. You've seen, I hope you've seen, I don't know, either the current iteration, there was a relatively new movie about the old series called Mr. Rogers, and his thing is that when he would come into the opening scenes, he would take off his work blazer and put on a comfortable sweater, and he would take off his work leather shoes and put on comfortable tennis shoes. And what that was is was a transition period. Over here, I'm at work, and over here, I am absolutely not. Law enforcement, medical personnel, these are hard charging professionals that are moving forward. There's a lot of accountability. You got to get all the things right. When you go home, it can easily feel like something's missing. And unless you address that home intentionally and say, this is my refuge and my place of rest, this is where I recover. And so it's about a mental approach. This is awareness and balance at the same time. You decided that home is not someplace, because if you don't, if you're not thinking about it, if you look at divorce rates of law enforcement and other negative aspects of being on, and then come home, it's tough because you're not needed on that level. And that's a tough adjustment. All you really need to make that adjustment is awareness of it and a little practice at it, because it's tough. It's tough to go from type A to type B or B minus personality at home and just relax a little bit. Like I said, it's tough to convince law officers to take a bubble bath with lavender. That's a challenge, but it could be done. And the idea behind it is the mental approach to deal with the actual problems of spinning in a direction where you'll just end up where your brain takes you versus directing the traffic, seeing that you do have some voice and choice in the way things are going in there. The other part of this is connectivity. Some of that connectivity happens with your people at work because you speak the same language, you use the same verbal shortcuts, the same acronyms maybe, or the 10 codes. You have the same objectives, you have the same borderlines. Okay, well, this goes too far, this is legal, this is illegal, this is too much to look at, this is a big event, and you don't want to bring that home. You don't necessarily want to talk about home stuff. So you talk about that with your tribe, with your people. When you go home, make sure that you make that connection in a different direction. You got together with your spouse or your significant other, or you made friends with these people for some reason. Lean on that. Absolutely lean on that. And whatever that connectivity is, understand that this is this and that is that, and it's tough when you blend those without a conscious decision that where the boundaries are and what we're going to do about those. That can be where we get into a little bit of trouble. If you're expecting this and this is what the reality is, that can be a little bit of an issue. We have developed a whole pie mindset. It's just some cute little graphic that we put up. Before COVID, we would actually bring a pie to these presentations and cut the slices up to represent this. And it was also a bribe for us to have good positive feedback. And you consider it yourself as well. If you don't like this presentation, feel free to lie. I'm totally cool with that. That's fine. But this whole pie mindset balance plan is an invitation to examine each of these 9 parts of the pie. Some of those are going to be going very well for you. Some of them you have already decided are a priority, and some of them get pushed to the back burner. This is our invitation to ask you what might be a better balance. And this first one is this work-life balance. We just talked about the transition from one to the other, and how it works with the home life. So the idea behind looking at this list is to see what on here, like if you were rating this for 1 to 10, how is this going right now? My work-life balance is a 10. I don't need to mess with that, but maybe I have neglected something else down on the list, whatever. If something comes down on the list that is less than 5 or 3 or anything like that, decide whether you have made it less important intentionally, or if it just kind of happened that way. Sometimes the work-life balance just happens the way it happens because everything seems vitally important. And this goes back to the caregiver syndrome, where if everything is out there that's important is important, and you don't get on that list of important things, that can be an issue. And it's about deciding to do that. Some of the questions that we've already dealt with is, how do I talk to my boss about making space And how do I talk to my family? Sometimes you might need to ask your family to give you a few minutes as you walk in the door. If it's a 6-minute transportation between your solid on-the-go workplace and your house, you might need to talk to people and say, look, they might have been waiting at the door and they're going to bring you their entire day, good, bad, indifferent, what the dog did on the carpet. All of those things might be jumping right in your face immediately at the door. And it might be worth a conversation to say, you know what, guys, I would like to transition a little bit better. So give me a few before we get in the habit of doing that. I'm going to come in, I'm going to hug your neck and smooch on your cheeks and tell you that I love you. And then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a cup of tea. I'm going to have some coffee. I'm going to have a moment to myself and do that so that you're better for them and with them as it goes along. And a lot of these times, we might be afraid of that causing a conflict. And I'll tell you from a conflict resolution that most conflicts are way worse in our heads before we talk about them. So having this conversation might be the eye opener and go, you have been being a little bit of a jerk lately. Maybe I can contribute to giving you some peace. However that works out, and it doesn't. But conflict itself is not bad. Unresolved conflict can be terrible because it's likely to come up during times of extreme stress or times when other conflict is the actual thing, and then the real conflict comes down, and we've conflated the difference between the problem and the symptoms. Because the problem is that we're not having good boundaries. The symptoms can be any number of things that stem out from there, and the symptoms can grow to become problems themselves. If a glass of wine to relax becomes your tool, then it becomes a crutch. Then you've seen all of that more times than I'm qualified to tell you about for certain. Let's go to the home life situation. A little bit is what we just covered about asking for boundary protection and say, look, I need to be at my best so that I can. You don't necessarily need to build your own space so that you can have all your time off. We broke down the week. Everybody has 168 hours. Sleep takes up a certain amount, work takes up a certain amount, and what you have left over is what you have. And we're inviting you to spend that time as intentionally as you can. Whatever you do for recreation, if it's just taking the kids to the zoo, do it and roll around in it and try to get 100% participation in that. Be fully present in just listening to your kids. How was your day? If a little kid brings you a rock out of the garden, in that moment, to you, it might be just a rock, but in that moment, it's their whole world. It's the coolest thing they've ever seen, and they're giving it to you, and you have to have a little bit of wellness inside you to accept that rock with the honor and the love that it deserves. So if those things are in place, and if you've got good boundaries and all these sort of things, we move on to the overcoming of obstacles and simply being resilient. That comes from a place where instead of here, you're here, and you can understand priorities. And if you've been through, God forbid, things that are really big and people are bringing you trivial stuff, to them it's huge, but you have a perspective of understanding, okay, I can receive this in the spirit which is given, or I can choose not to receive it. If somebody's just giving you a bucket full of grief, you're not obligated to pick that up. It's the overcoming of obstacles, and the resilient mindset allows you to separate the emotional content of what comes toward you from coworkers or family and let that be what it is, but deal with the facts and the actual situation that needs to be dealt with at the time. Moving on to a learning or growth mindset. Lots of research indicates that crossword puzzles, for example, might delay the onset of dementia or challenges in the brain function just by keeping it busy, practicing using your brain at a higher level. If, once we get into our adulthood, we can kind of set things on autopilot, and that works, and it's really well. But if the autopilot kind of starts accepting where you are as the upper limit, then it might be time to stretch that just a little bit. Pick up a book, read something that's unfamiliar, study a new language, or pick up a musical instrument. That's huge. as far as cognitive challenges, you know, working on things. And you don't have to be great at it. You don't have to be great at it. You don't have to whip out the Times crossword puzzle in under 30 seconds. Just do it. Just participate. You don't have to be great as a musician unless you're going for Carnegie Hall. But if you're going for just singing some songs with your kids around a campfire, pretty easy to get that far. Interpersonal relationships are another area that we get to choose what boundary is. And some of those, this becomes a difficult conversation because you have to kind of evaluate your friends sometimes, maybe your family itself, but mostly say friends. If you have a friend that is, I've suffered the grief of losing friends voluntarily by evaluating this person and saying, you know, when I speak to them, I'm usually asked to engage far more than is healthy for me. I'm getting boundaries stepped on, and it becomes a situation where somebody is a bit of an energy vampire and they don't mean to. I've been blessed with some of these folks that are just letting their daily lives roll on, and I've become a resource for tools to lend out or money to lend out or any kind of these things, when maybe even I didn't have that to lend, but I do anyway because my boundaries were not well established and lovingly defended. And they have no boundaries, so that when I've had the conversation of or just stop answering phone calls or that sort of stuff, or like, look, I keep losing stuff, I can't lend out anymore, whatever that conversation ends up being, if you approach it with a loving, growth, love-based conversation idea, if you just have to shut them off, then, you know, that's a different thing. But practice being loving in spite of somebody kind of taking more than is their share of you. That's a tool worth developing, and you can think about it ahead of time, visualize it like an athlete would visualize a successful golf swing or high jump or anything along those lines. But if you're offering this conversation with the expectation that it's not going to go poorly, I've lost some friends doing that. Sometimes they will take it personally, and then I evaluate it later and go, you know, that wasn't that great a loss. I miss them. I miss the fun times we had when we were in a different season of our lives, but I don't miss being drained all the time. Most of the time, because you're cool people and you're probably friends with cool people, it's just a little bit of a holding up a loving mirror and saying, hey man, this is reflecting on me in a tough kind of way, and I'm going through some stuff right now. I need to ease up on the number of times we go out at night because I got family cooking here. I still want to do it. I still love hanging out with you, but I gotta back off a little bit because my balance is out. I'm not as well as I need to be. So instead of tonight, let's make a date for Saturday. You want to make sure that you kind of keep things going. And almost invariably, people will understand that inertia has carried them to a place where it's uncomfortable for you, and they're totally willing to help that out. Again, one of those places where the imagining of the impending conflict can look horrible and terrible, but the actual conversation ends up being, I get it. I get it. And it happens more often than you might think. Physical health is another category that we ask people about. And there's a way to use the sensory stimulation system in there. When you are on a treadmill and you're running on a treadmill, that is a great victory. If you do it until you're exhausted, that's imbalance. Or you're exhausted and then you go a little bit farther. But me, I've learned, I was very physically fit 20 years ago. So if I get on the treadmill today with 20-year-old expectations, things can go poorly very quickly. But just the fact that I'm on there means that I've had a little victory. I've done something. I feel better. I've changed this physiology. There are multiple studies, one in particular from Stanford University, where they do what scientists do. They wire everybody up 9 ways from zero, and they put EKGs and EEGs and every one of the letters of the alphabet on people, and they have them exercise and walk outside in an urban environment. And they had another group operate in a place where growing things happen, whether it's a park or where there's grass and where there's trees. And the same amount of distance walked or ran or whatever that is that they're doing, if that happens in a nature intense environment, if it's possible to be around where things are growing and where nature is happening, you get more out of the physical exercise that you're doing. There's a little bit of that goes to the sensory stimulation that running outside as opposed to a treadmill means that you have to deal with traffic and you're listening for cars and other hazards and dogs, and you have to take traction in the road and gravel on the road into account. You have to think about different things, and it takes your brain away from the rumination that can happen just steadily on a treadmill. But if you're doing all of those things, you're going to get more benefit from what you're doing. So your time is used more efficiently than would ordinarily be the case. But whatever it is that you do, I would urge you to keep that in balance. If some, I've known people that have picked up a dietary lifestyle or an exercise lifestyle, and it becomes so huge. Converts tend toward fanaticism. So when something is new and you're getting these great results out of it, you're going to want to talk about it all the time. You're going to want to maybe do it so much that it becomes imbalanced. And I'm urging you to be aware of those boundaries as well. Get on there and accept the victories and accept the wins of feeling better and doing that, and don't do it so much that you can't do it again tomorrow because you're so, what we call in Texas, stove up that you can't hardly move none. So the physical health aspect of it is very important, and that goes to like say diet. It's possible to get out of balance with that, but it's also possible to get some rewards by saying, okay, this time right now today, I am not going to go for that little tiny powdery white donut. I'm gonna pass. I'm gonna have a glass of water. I'm gonna eat something that's healthier, and I might grab that donut later, but I'm winning right now. And those little victories it can be built up. Emotional health. Now this is tough because it's the toughest thing to determine if you are out of balance with. So the key here is to find somebody that you trust and talk about it. I happen to Marla is a person that is very adept at holding that mirror up in a really loving and supportive way and saying, are you sure this is what you want to present yourself as to people? And that helps. Another flag is the answer of the question, how you doing? It's a conversational starter that's not maybe deep all the time, but if your answer is consistently, oh man, I'm so wiped out, I'm so tired, I'm so busy, what is your answer to that question? How are you defining yourself? That is a good indicator of how things are going. And by changing it, it's almost a little bit of, it's not disingenuous, but there's a little bit of fake it till you make it involved. If you practice answering that one question that gets put to you several times, probably a day, multiple times a week, if you practice answering that question in a more positive way, man, I'm doing great, or I'm taking it one day at a time, but I'm all right. Don't necessarily lie to yourself or others. That leads to all kinds of bad things, but make it real. Accept the fact that thoughts are things. Thoughts are actual things that have some degree of influence over how you are. And if you're consistently reinforcing, oh, I'm so tired, I'm so wiped out, people are picking on me, the kitchen flooded, all these, oh, it's so terrible, horrible. That is maybe the truth, but you have the power to change that truth by changing how you react to it. There's a E plus R equals O. Jack Canfield talks about that. The event plus your reaction to it equals the outcome. Events happen all the time. Your reaction can be chosen and it can influence the outcome. Enjoyment and fun. Now, again, I would urge balance here. Don't want to have too much fun. Ooh, can't have that. But having fun, again, it can be one of those things that feels a little selfish. And of course, obviously it can be, but if a little bit by fun, I don't necessarily mean taking every other week and going to Barbados. I'm talking about just little things that you find pleasure. Sunsets, you know, if you happen to be mowing your yard and the sun's going down and it turns out to be very beautiful in that moment, stop right there. Stop and smell the roses. There's a great advice in there. But whatever that is that you're doing, and I'd have to say, I'm not really a great gardener. If you have to depend on me for your water or nutrition, you're probably in trouble. But, and you can ask my Benjamin Ficus, he'll testify. But if you are in the gardening kind of way, the thing about gardening that I do like is that in that moment, you are choosing weeds to remove, choosing things that you want out of your space, nourishing and supporting the things that you want in your space. And you're physically doing it. You're getting your hands dirty. There's smells involved. There's sounds, there's hearing, there's all of the sensory stimulation in there, but it's also very determinative in terms of how you want your world to be. And it's a great microcosm of ways to garden your coworkers and all these things. And I'm not talking about being manipulative. I'm just talking about intentionally approaching things. Spiritual health, I'm not really qualified to talk about, but I find a great deal of comfort in understanding that I'm not in charge of the world. I gave that up one year for a practice of a faith system that I'm not involved in, but I gave up being in charge of the entire universe for Lent. And I got the most lovely thank you card from the universe in the form of peace, in the form of fewer broken or unmanaged expectations. And it was a brilliant, wonderful gift to understand that I have been reinforced with like, oh, he's got so much potential, all this good stuff. And it really allowed me to go too far in my own mind and being in charge of everything and having to be right all the time. And my expectations must be met. And even when I was managing that well, it was bringing me more unease than was good for me in my world. So any of these things you can look at and decide if they require more attention, that they might, it might be time to say, so I would suggest taking this list and say, okay, I'm gonna rank what is going the best down to what is going the worst. Or you might rank it in terms of what needs to be done, something that's going the worst, can't be addressed right now. Just understand that it's on the list. If your own wellness is on the list, going back to that why question, why do I do this? I don't have time to take a full shower. I don't have time to call my friends. I don't have time. Some of that is an imbalance in terms of the choices that we're making automatically. And if we make at least one or two intentionally, for example, if you are going short of sleep, sometimes that's necessary. Brand new parents, they are sleep deprived to the point where they dream about having a nap while they're just standing up, changing a diaper. But in general, if tired is your answer to that how are you doing question all the time, there may be something you can do about that. Not everybody needs 8 hours of sleep a night, but under 6, and we start damaging ourselves. There's a restorative need, physical, biological need for sleep. And under that point, things start to go badly. And when they go badly, then you bring that badness into work. You start making mistakes. Your boss starts to notice those things, and bosses are really good at noticing those things. When you are sacrificing sleep on a regular basis, sometimes all hands on deck is what's called for. But if you're living all hands on deck, it might be time to take a look at something else. So I'm going to pause here and invite any questions that we might have, or see if we can do anything at all to help you at all. Is there any way we can make your world better, Charisse?
Okay, thank you. Oh my goodness, Tony. So the journey of 1,000 miles does not begin with a single step. It starts with the decision to make the journey. I love that. Also, you talked about the 5 senses sensory stimulation kit, the ABCs of wellness, awareness, balance, and connection, and the whole pie mindset. So many great nuggets, so many great nuggets. And we do have a couple of questions. But again, thank you. Were you finished your presentation, or do you want me to go right to the questions?
Sure, we can go questions, sure.
All right, all right. So thank you for providing us this, you and your team for providing us critical information during this time of need. We would like to open up the webinar now for the questions that you may have. Remember that you will stay muted to avoid background noise, but you can type your question in the question box at the right-hand side of your screen, if viewing from a computer, or at the bottom of the screen if viewing from a phone. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, or if you have a comment about the webinar today, and there are already seen some comments, so thank you, please enter these into the questions box now. If we do not have time to answer each question today, we will provide our contact information at the end of the webinar for anyone who may wish to reach us. Now for some questions. Tony, the first question we have is, what can I do to help promote wellness amongst others in my department?
I would say that's a leadership issue. If you determine that your department is what Seth Godin calls people like us do things like that.
Yeah.
So this is our culture. If you're in a leadership capacity, anything you can do, maybe just put up a sign. Hey, we're going to do this. Put up those little affirmative signs. Anything in those areas. But the biggest thing to do would be to lead, to model the calm that you would like to see in others, to model what you would like to see, and just make it comfortable for people. Give somebody a break. Might be time to ask somebody for a cup of coffee. Or anything, and those are just, I would say, just do it. And here's another aspect to that. Understand that it's possible that you might make a mistake as you're doing that, and give yourself grace. It might go better next time. Think about how that went well, if that conversation went well, or if it didn't. Understand that folks is folks, as we say in Texas, and it's not going to go perfectly all the time. Give yourself some grace, and just show leadership in that area.
Thank you. Next question is, how to open a line of communication for important dialogue and discussion between family members, peers, coworkers, or someone we see struggling?
That goes back to that first issue, is just mirror the calm, just exemplify what you want to see. If you're too frazzled to deal in anything, maybe it's time for self-care first. If it's an emergency situation, if you're approaching this from a love-based situation, and I say this as opposed to fear-based. A fearful person manifests that sort of thing all the time. And if you choose to be a person that's going to try to do this, that's a big step. Just the big step. That's that journey that you're choosing to go in this direction and not the 359 other directions that are available to you. So that's a lot of it. That's the leadership. And specifically, it's that conflict avoidance. It feels like conflict, but I'll bet everybody's on the same team. I bet everybody would like to feel a little bit better. And if you can present that in a way that connects with the people you're talking to, that's going to be different if you're talking to law enforcement than if you're talking to a nurse, than if you're talking to an administrative person or a counselor. It's going to be a different conversation, not disingenuous, but relating to the people that you're talking to, and it can go a long way, and it's going to be a lot easier than you think. And and if you use we language, hey, let's do this thing. It's going to be better for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So Tony, we're getting, thank you so much. We're getting great comments. We're getting, this is a great presentation. Someone said, thank you so much. Another person said, great information. So good job. So we have another couple of more questions. How can I make sure the energy I give is being matched with the energy I am receiving? Or how can I make sure that I am not overextending myself for others when they may not do the same for me?
That's a tough question. I would say this: the energy you're receiving is not your business in some ways. I'm sorry if that sounds a little harsh, but the energy you're receiving is the fact is some of that it can be this. Understand that you're talking to and dealing with people that have very, very big stressors in their life. Something is the most important thing in their life, and it's a bad thing. Sometimes if you're they'll say that you'll get $1 worth of response for a 10-cent input, and you see that sort of thing, that might be time to just ask somebody and not address that question in that moment. The first step might be to say, hey, I'm here with you. Let's do this thing. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. I'm sorry you're doing that. And if you are able to approach the connection first and then address the issues. I forgot who said that. I can't think of it immediately, but that people don't care what you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
So if that is your primary message, then, and what you're reacting to, then the rest of it tends to fall in line. You might need more information from them. You might need any of these things, but the first thing I would urge you to do would be to connect from one human to another, because that's kind of rare, particularly in this time of isolation, particularly in this political moment where we're in, and road rage is happening, and people are offering violence and horrible words based on whether you can look somebody in the nostril. These things are, and people are entitled to whatever their perspective is. They're not entitled to treat you poorly. So balance and boundaries becomes important there. But sometimes if you can give a little grace, because we need some grace sometimes. And if you've provided grace, you might be in a better position to ask for grace when it's your turn.
Oh, absolutely. We have a couple more questions. Tony, do you have any suggestions or tips for self-care in a professional setting?
Yes, I would say that the sensory stimulation kit is a big tool that can help. And you don't have to make a big production out of it. It's not important for you to parade your teddy bear around the office to talk about how well you're doing, unless that's part of your leadership skills and you want to do that. But we talked about tactical breathing shortly, and basically this is something that the Navy SEALs who know about stress, they are trained to do. And it's breathing, deep breathing. We all do that. It's a wonderful thing. It changes your physiology. But tactical breathing is when you breathe in for a slow count of 4. You may notice that at 3, my lungs were basically full, but that extra count, that's hyperoxygenating your system. Hold that for 4. Breathe it out for 4, and again, you're done with carbon dioxide at 3, and that extra 4 sends it all the way out. Hold it out for 4 and breathe it in. It's a physical exercise that will change your physiology immediately. Nobody around you has to know what you're doing, or you can lead everybody in the exercise. It's up to you.
All right, we have time for about 2 more questions. So the next question is, how can I explain to my job that I need a break for self-care?
Yes, this is the not bringing your boss a problem. You can't walk in there and demand a break. It's just not probably going to go very well. If you can present this in a way that is clear to your boss that it's to their advantage to do it, because everybody needs to look good to their boss. So if your boss looks good to their boss by implementing this thing, I wouldn't ask for too much. I need Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to be just all massages and fishing, or whatever your boogie is. That's asking for too much. But 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time, sometime in between one client and the next, some structural change that's a minor structural change. Evaluate that in terms of what makes them look good to their boss. Hey, I've got this thing you can bring in and we can make everybody better. And then you'll discover that there's less office drama. This wellness, it has its own energy cyclone. Things go bad and they'll head towards a drain. But if you add energy into it, things get a little better, and then they start getting a little better because you've created a platform from which more good things can happen.
All right, and this question just came in on the chat. It says, this has been excellent. I'll be holding support group soon. Would Tony consider speaking at one?
I would love to. I'd be so honored to do that. I would absolutely be glad to help. And like I say, I have a whole team behind me. The Resolution Solutions crew is full of really smart people, and everything that I said today that's at all good, they taught me. So,
okay.
So I'll be glad to help.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Tony, for the great information, great nuggets, high energy. Thank you so much.
Oh, so
Marcus,
glad. Thank you. God bless you for what you do.
Thank you. Turning it over to you, Marcus.
Thank you. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you again to Tony Barker and Sharice for volunteering your time this afternoon for this exceedingly useful discussion. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and will be emailed to registrants tomorrow. The webinar will also be uploaded to our website at www.namimd.org for any individuals who were unable to register for the webinar today. We hope that this webinar has been helpful for you this afternoon. At the end of the webinar today, you'll be asked to complete a short survey on the aspects aspects of this webinar that you felt were helpful, could be improved, and what you would like to see in future webinars. We plan to continue hosting educational webinars, and this survey will help determine how NAMI Maryland can best support you during this time. NAMI has partnered with BetterHelp to support our local healthcare workers by providing access to a free month of therapy. BetterHelp is convenient, private online therapy where you can talk to a licensed professional therapist at any time. If you are a healthcare worker, including mental health and/or substance use provider, be sure to fill out the post-webinar feedback form to receive instructions and your discount code. And also, don't forget, we can only offer these webinars free of charge because of the dedicated support of individuals and organizations like yours. While we already knew that 1 in 3 adults reported experiencing symptoms of anxiety or depression, a new study found that 52% of adults have been more open with others about their mental health since the pandemic started. This rising need means we need your help now more than ever, and we invite you to join us for our 2022 NAMI Walks Your Way Maryland campaign. NAMI Walks is a several months long campaign that promotes public awareness of mental health, reduces stigma, and supports our mission of recovery-focused support, education, and advocacy for individuals and loved ones affected by mental health conditions. This campaign will build on last year's success and will continue to explore and expand on the positive ways the arts impact mental health. We're excited to share that this year will be a hybrid of virtual and private in-person events that will begin in early spring and will include a visual art showcase on Saturday, May 21st, 2022, and an in-person invite-only VIP wrap-up party on Saturday, July 9th, 2022. The first NAMI Walks took place in Maryland 20 years ago, and we invite you to celebrate this milestone with us as a participant for this incredible campaign. You can learn more about NAMI Walks and register for free at www.namiwalks.org/Maryland. We wish you all a safe and healthy rest of your week, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us through our website or by phone at 410-884-8691 should you need additional resources or support. Have a great rest of your day.